Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're opening the file on a case that, it really defined a generation of cold case investigations here in California. It's just a devastating story.
It really is. You see this mix of institutional failure, incredible family dedication, and then eventually this hard-won resolution thanks to modern forensics and, importantly, renewed public focus after 26 years.
We are talking, of course, about the disappearance and murder of Kristin Smart.
Yeah, and it's such an essential story for you to understand, not just because it got solved, sort of, but because it's like this painful roadmap. It shows what happens when that initial police work fails.
And how the community and technology eventually have to step in.
Exactly, to force a reckoning. And look, we have incredibly comprehensive source material for this. It details the investigation right from the moment Kristin vanished in 1996, all the way through the sentencing in 2023.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to pull out the most crucial legal and investigative points from that whole decades-long narrative for you.
Okay, let's start with Kristin herself. Who was she, and what exactly happened the moment she disappeared?
Right. She was born in 1977, actually, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. Her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, they were teachers working with American military families over there.
Ah, okay.
Then the family moved back to Stockton, California. And in 1996, Kristin was a freshman at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She was 19 and apparently quite striking, very tall, 6'1".
Right. So the scene of her disappearance, it's agonizingly specific. It happened during Memorial Day weekend.
Which was the final weekend of her freshman year at Cal Poly.
Exactly. So on the night of Friday, May 24th, 1996, she went to an off-campus fraternity house party alone.
Okay. And then fast forward a few hours, around 2 a.m. on Saturday, May 25th. This is where things get really murky. She was apparently found passed out on a neighbor's lawn near the party house.
Yeah, and two other students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis, they tried to help her, started walking her back towards her dorm, which was Muir Hall.
Right. And this is where the whole thing takes that sinister turn. A third student from the party, Paul Flores, he joins the group walking Kristin back.
He lived in a different dorm, Santa Lucia Hall. Now, Tim Davis, he leaves first. He lived off campus, different direction.
Okay.
But Cheryl Anderson, she was the second one to leave, heading to her own dorm. But crucially, she only left after Flores specifically told her, gave her his word, that he would get Kristin safely back to Muir Hall.
That promise, which of course he didn't keep.
No. Flores' later statement to the police, that's the last known sort of verified account of Kristin Smart. He claimed he only walked with her as far as his dormitory, San Lucia Hall.
Which was closer to the party than her dorm.
Right. And then he said he just let her walk the rest of the way to Muir Hall by herself.
In the middle of the night, clearly intoxicated.
Exactly. And what's immediately suspicious here, what should have been a massive red flag for the campus police right away, is she vanished completely. No money, no credit cards, no ID, nothing.
When a student disappears like that, leaving everything behind, it should be high risk immediately, right?
Absolutely. You treat it as foul play until proven otherwise. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's dive straight into the, frankly, profound institutional failure that happened right after that critical night.
Yeah, that failure. It's laid out so starkly in our sources. It's genuinely one of the most frustrating parts of this whole case. The University Police Department, the UPD.
What do they do or not do?
They initially suspected she'd just gone on an unannounced vacation because it was the start of summer break.
Oh, come on. Seriously. Vacation without telling anyone, without her wallet.
I know, and that assumption, it led to this devastating critical delay. Her family called the UPD right away. They were sounding the alarm. Kristin Smart was only officially reported missing to local law enforcement, that's the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office, a full week later.
Well, first off, evidence. You're dealing with springtime weather, right? Rain, sun, wind. It's the enemy of physical evidence outdoors. Any potential DNA, fibers, maybe fingerprints at the scene, or even on Flores himself if there was a struggle.
Gone, washed away, contaminated.
Exactly. Destroyed by the elements, or just normal human activity over 7 days. And that's just forensics. Think about witnesses.
And memory fades fast.
Incredibly fast. Someone who saw something maybe a bit odd on Saturday morning, a week later, that memory is hazy, unreliable, maybe gone completely. That initial failure by the UPD to grasp the seriousness, it basically crippled the investigation before it even got off the ground. Valuable leads, potential evidence, just vanished.
So once she was officially reported missing, a week later, the search efforts did begin, right? And they were pretty intense initially.
They were. You had volunteers out searching, people on horseback combing the area. They even brought in ground-penetrating radar devices, GPR, to search around the campus.
But nothing turned up. For almost 2 decades, really.
No useful leads, no. And it's interesting, you have to place this in the wider California media context back then. Cold cases sometimes get overshadowed by newer, more sensational ones.
Like the Lacey Peterson case. I remember hearing rumors connecting Scott Peterson.
Exactly. There were these completely unfounded rumors that Scott Peterson, who also went to Cal Poly years before, might somehow be linked to Kristin's disappearance. This is during the huge media frenzy around Lacey Peterson's murder.
Did police look into that?
They did, briefly. Mostly just to quiet the speculation, But he was very quickly and officially ruled out as a suspect. It just shows how far afield things could go when they had no solid leads on Kristin.
So the case just went stone cold.
Pretty much. The sources detail multiple searches between '96 and 2007. They even used cadaver dogs on properties owned by the Flores family because Paul was the immediate person of interest.
But still nothing for almost 20 years. Which raises a huge question, doesn't it? If, as we find out later, her body was initially buried on their property, why didn't those early cadaver dog searches find anything?
That speaks volumes about the cover-up that happened later. We'll definitely get into that. But the tragedy of this early period, it's just compounded by actual lost evidence.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really infuriating.
What happened?
There was a critical piece of potential evidence found early on, an earring, believed to belong to Kristin Smart. It was found by a tenant at the former home of Paul Flores' mother.
Wait, an earring. Found at a property linked to the main suspect. And don't tell me.
It was lost by law enforcement.
You're kidding. How? Why wasn't it logged? Why wasn't it kept as evidence? What did the sources say?
It seems to be a fundamental breakdown in the chain of custody. It was found. Someone recognized it might be important because of where it was found. But it was never officially marked, never documented, never entered into the evidence system.
So it just disappeared?
Disappeared from the records. Poof. Gone. Yeah. Imagine how crucial that single, small, personal item could have been back then, linking Flores directly to Kristin. But nope. Basic procedural failure. Gone forever.
Unbelievable. Meanwhile, her family, Stan and Denise, they had to face this grueling legal reality. She's been missing for years.
Right. And on May 25th, 2002, that was the 6-year anniversary of her disappearance, Kristin Smart was declared legally dead in absentia.
That must have been incredibly painful, but necessary.
Absolutely necessary, though heartbreaking. Declaring her legally dead closed one chapter, yes, but importantly, it gave the Smart family the legal standing they needed for the next step.
Which was the civil suit.
Exactly. The 2005 civil wrongful death suit against Paul Flores. They couldn't have filed that while she was technically just a missing person.
And that suit, it really felt like a desperate measure to try and force some answers, didn't it? Stan and Denise filed it, represented pro bono.
Which just shows their incredible commitment, right? Even when the official investigation seemed stalled.
But the suit didn't really go anywhere.
It hit a predictable wall. Paul Flores invoked the Fifth Amendment, refused to testify, arguing it could incriminate him in a potential criminal case.
So, without his testimony, and with no real physical evidence back then,
the Smarts were essentially forced to drop the civil suit. They couldn't compel him to talk.
And then, didn't the Flores family actually sue the Smarts?
Yeah, in this really bizarre, aggressive move around 2006 or 2007, they filed a counter lawsuit against Stan and Denise for emotional distress.
Seriously, did that go anywhere?
No, thankfully. Our sources make it clear it was unsuccessful, thrown out pretty quickly. But it just highlights the antagonism, the legal battle lines drawn between the families.
So by the late 2000s, the case is just stuck. Legally, investigatively, everything. The Smarts had tried every possible avenue.
Completely stuck in limbo. It's a really bleak point in the timeline.
Okay, let's jump forward to the 2010s, because this is when we start seeing the first real signs of change, right? The San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office finally seems to take ownership.
Yeah, they dedicated significant resources, finally. They spent thousands of hours, thousands of dollars doing this massive internal cold case review, basically re-examining everything from scratch between 2011 and 2016.
And the resources started to match the seriousness of the case. The FBI kept her file active, right? High priority missing person. There was that reward money, too.
Right. The FBI had a standing $75,000 reward. And then there was this private citizen, Terry Black, no connection to the family at all, just moved by the story. He offered another $100,000 reward, just for the location of Kristin's body.
That's incredible generosity. But I think we have to talk about the thing that really seemed to just blow this case wide open again, something unexpected.
You mean the podcast?
The Independent podcast. Starting September 30, 2019, Chris Lambert released this series called Your Own Backyard.
And the impact was, honestly, it was immediate and absolutely massive. This wasn't just another true crime podcast for entertainment. It functioned almost like a real investigative tool.
How so? What made it different?
Well, Lambert focused intensely on the local details, the geography of SLO County, the social circles back in 1996, things may be overlooked or forgotten. And it generated, what was it, over 30 million downloads.
30 million. It just shattered that cold case fatigue that had obviously set in over 20 years.
Totally. And what specifically made it work as an investigative tool beyond just raising general awareness again?
That's a good question. What do the sources say?
It seemed to mobilize the specific community that maybe felt disconnected from the case for years. Cal Poly alumni, people living right there in San Luis Obispo County. By constantly bringing up the details, focusing on that local history, it created this feeling almost like a public safety issue that demanded action now.
And crucially, didn't it lead to new witnesses?
That's what the sources confirm, yeah. This renewed public interest, directly fueled by the podcast, helped law enforcement uncover several new witnesses, people who maybe held back information for 2 decades for whatever reason, but now felt the pressure or maybe the obligation to finally come forward.
It also led to that new billboard, right, in Arroyo Grande.
Yeah, January 2020, replacing the old one that had been there since like 1997, just another sign of the renewed focus.
And this public attention, it directly led to more police action. Even before the podcast fully took off, back in September 2016, officials announced they had a new lead.
Right. That's when they brought in FBI cadaver dogs. Led to that big 4-day excavation on the Cal Poly campus right near Kristin's dorm.
On that hillside, yeah. Did they find anything significant then?
Well, it was intensive. Highly technical search. After 3 days, they announced they had found items at all 3 big sites there. But the sheriff's office spokesperson was really cautious, said analysis would take days, weeks, or months.
And did those items lead anywhere?
Our sources indicate that even as late as 2020, the investigation into whatever they found was still ongoing, which suggests, maybe it wasn't the definitive breakthrough, but maybe just another small piece of this giant puzzle they were slowly putting together.
And during all this renewed activity, there was that moment of, communication confusion with the family wasn't there. That must have caused a lot of false hope.
Oh, yeah. January 2020. The Stockton Record newspaper reported that the FBI had supposedly told the Smart family that news was coming, that they should get away for a while.
Which sounds like something big is about to break.
Exactly. It created this huge media flurry, massive hope.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be, not quite accurate.
What was the real story?
A correction came out pretty quickly. The FBI hadn't officially contacted the family like that. The source of the advice was actually a retired FBI agent. Someone who'd been in private contact with the family for years, offering support.
So it was more like personal encouragement, not an official heads up.
Precisely. Which really underscores the difference between that public hope, desperate for news after decades, and the slow, grinding reality of police procedure.
Okay, so by 2020, the focus is narrowing intensely on Paul Flores again.
Squarely on him. In January 2020, the SLO sheriff confirms they seized 2 trucks owned by Flores as evidence. Then February 2020, boom. Search warrants served at 4 different locations all at once.
Where were they?
2 in San Luis Obispo County, 1 up in Washington State, and 1 down in LA County. They were clearly running this coordinated pressure campaign across multiple states.
And Flores was detained during those searches.
Briefly, yeah. But the really shocking stuff, the evidence that ultimately proved crucial, came in April 2020. That's when they served a warrant at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, down in LA, with the LA County Sheriff assisting.
This must have been a huge moment, to go from a decades-old missing person case to suddenly finding evidence of current predatory behavior. How did that change things?
It fundamentally shifted the narrative.
Yeah.
For investigators, for the Smart family.
Mm.
It was horrifying, but it was also potentially the key. What exactly did they find in his house?
Okay, the specifics from that search, they were damning, painted this awful picture of Flores' life. Detectives found numerous items of interest.
Which included
date rape drugs. And homemade videos showing Flores, showing him in acts of sodomizing and raping young women.
Oh my.
Yeah. This wasn't just about 1996 anymore. This gave investigators critical insight into his pattern of behavior, his modus operandi. It built this powerful narrative for the prosecution about his likely motives and actions back when Kristin disappeared. This was evidence pointing to a serial predator.
Wow. Okay. So with that context, the investigation then turns back to the biggest question. Where is Kristin's body?
Exactly. And the focus shifts to Paul's father, Ruben Flores. In March 2021, a new warrant for Ruben Flores' home in Arroyo Grande.
And they brought out the heavy hitters this time.
Oh, yeah. Cadaver dogs again, but also high-tech ground-penetrating radar GPR. They even towed away an old car, a 1985 Volkswagen Cabriolet, from his property, suggesting they were looking for anything large enough that might have been used to move remains.
This is where the science finally cracked it, right? The mystery of where she'd gone.
Yes. April 2021, prosecutors make the announcement. The GPR and the cadaver dogs together had found biological evidence indicating that Kristin Smart's body was once buried beneath the deck of Ruben Flores' home.
Beneath the deck. Let's unpack that science for a second, because this is the absolute core piece that led to the arrests. What does biological evidence mean here if they didn't find the body itself? And how did GPR and the dogs work together?
Right. So GPR, the ground-penetrating radar, it basically detects changes in soil density. When you bury something large, like a body, the soil gets disturbed, compacted differently. The radar can see that disturbance, that anomaly, even years later.
Okay, so it sees the whole, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. And the cadaver dogs, they're trained specifically to detect the chemical compounds released during human decomposition. These decomposition fluids and gases can linger in the soil for a very, very long time.
So the GPR points to the disturbed spot under the deck, and the dogs alert on that same spot, confirming human remains were there.
Exactly. The combined hit is incredibly powerful. The grave site was identified, but it was empty. But the chemical residue, the biological evidence, likely decomposition fluid, was still present in the soil, along with the disturbed soil structure seen by the GPR.
But that finding, it also points directly to a massive cover-up, right? Which explains why those earlier searches, years ago, came up empty.
Absolutely. The prosecution's conclusion was clear. The body had been buried there initially, but then at some later point, it was dug up, exhumed, and hidden somewhere else.
Likely after the initial heat died down, or maybe when they got spooked by later search efforts.
Precisely. The GPR finds the original grave, but the body's gone. And that points the finger straight at the father, Ruben, for helping to hide the crime after the fact. So after 25 years of institutional failure, family struggle, investigative dead ends, the arrests finally happened, April 13th, 2021.
Paul Flores and his father, Ruben Flores, were taken into custody.
Paul charged with murder, Ruben charged with being an accessory after the fact.
And this is a really key legal point here, a smart tactical move by the prosecution. The investigators concluded Paul Flores tried to rape Kristin Smart that night back in '96.
Right, and the district attorney, Dan Dow, he stated that even though the statute of limitations for sexual assault itself had long passed.
Decades ago, yeah.
The fact that the murder was committed in the course of that attempted rape, that justified the maximum charge, first-degree felony murder.
That's a critical distinction. Explain why securing that felony murder charge was so important for the prosecution. Why not just standard first degree?
Well, it significantly lowers the bar for what they have to prove to get that top murder conviction. For traditional first-degree murder, you have to prove premeditation, that Flores actually planned ahead to kill her.
Which would be incredibly hard to prove after 25 years, with no direct witnesses to the murder itself.
Almost impossible. But with felony murder, they didn't need to prove he planned to kill her. They only needed to prove the murder happened during the commission of another serious felony in this case, attempted rape.
And the evidence they found in his San Pedro house, the drugs, the videos.
Exactly. That established his pattern of behavior, his predatory nature. It supported the theory that the interaction with Kristin likely started as, or included, an attempted sexual assault, which then escalated to murder. It made the felony murder charge viable.
A much clearer path to a first-degree conviction. So, the trial itself. It gets complicated.
Highly complex and very publicized. It was supposed to start in April 2022, but it got delayed. The defense won a change of venue motion.
Because of all the publicity in San Luis Obispo County. Too hard to find an impartial jury there.
Precisely. So the whole trial was moved north to Monterey County, heard by Judge Jennifer O'Keefe.
And then there was the really unusual setup with the juries, right? To try and ensure fairness, given all the pretrial publicity and the fact they were trying father and son together, but for different crimes.
Yeah, they used simultaneous, separate juries. One jury just for Paul Flores, deciding the murder charge, and a completely separate jury just for Ruben Flores, deciding the accessory charge.
Wow. That must have been a massive logistical challenge for the prosecution team. How did that work in practice?
Well, think about it. You're essentially running two trials at the same time in the same courtroom.
Right. The prosecution had to present the same core evidence package. The GPR findings, the dog alerts, the witness accounts of Kristin walking with Flores. They had to present all that twice.
Once for each jury.
Exactly. And they had to tailor their arguments carefully. For Paul's jury, focus on him as the killer, the rapist. For Ruben's jury, focus specifically on Ruben's actions after the murder, the alleged moving and hiding of the body.
That sounds incredibly difficult to manage, keeping the narratives clear and separate for each jury.
Extremely difficult. A very long and complex presentation.
And even with all those precautions, they still ran into jury problems, didn't they?
They did. In Ruben Flores' case, specifically, one of the jurors had to be dismissed.
Why?
Apparently, the juror had discussed the case with his priest, seeking spiritual guidance because the stress of the trial was getting to him.
Oh, wow, you can't do that. Discussing the case outside the jury room?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So the judge had to dismiss him. An alternate juror was seated.
Which meant
that specific jury, Ruben's jury, had to completely restart their deliberations from the beginning with the new member. A significant delay, and just highlights the intense pressure and emotional weight of a case like this. Decades in the making.
Okay, so eventually, after all that, the verdicts finally came down, October 18th, 2022. What did the two separate juries decide? What does it all mean?
Well, the separate juries reached two very different conclusions, which I think reflects the different burdens of proof and maybe the specific evidence presented against each man. Paul Flores' jury found him guilty.
Guilty of?
Guilty of first-degree murder, the maximum charge. A huge victory for the prosecution and the Smart family.
Okay. And Ruben Flores, the father?
Ruben Flores' jury found him not guilty. Not guilty of being an accessory after the fact.
Wow. So Ruben walked free.
He walked free, which, yes, must have been a very difficult, complex, emotional outcome for the Smarts, even with the conviction of Paul.
Why do you think Ruben was acquitted? The evidence about the body being buried under his deck seemed pretty strong.
It did seem strong. But proving accessory beyond a reasonable doubt has specific legal elements. The prosecution needed to convince the jury not just that Ruben knew about the body, but that he actively and intentionally helped Paul conceal it or evade capture. Maybe that specific jury felt there wasn't enough direct evidence of his actions, despite the GPR and dog alerts pointing to his property. It's a high bar.
So Paul gets convicted. What was the final sentence?
The final legal closure, at least for the trial phase, came on March 10th, 2023. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Where is he serving that time?
He's currently at California State Prison, Corcoran.
And hasn't his time in prison been eventful already?
That's putting it mildly. It's not uncommon for inmates convicted of these types of crimes, sexual violence, to be targeted. Our sources say he was attacked twice with improvised weapons, shanks, by other inmates while he was at a previous prison, Pleasant Valley State Prison.
So they moved him to Corcoran after that?
Seems so. And we should note, he is appealing his conviction. His lawyers argued he didn't get a fair trial because of all the publicity. Oral arguments for that appeal were heard just recently, October 9, 2025, and a decision is expected within 90 days of that. So that legal chapter isn't completely closed yet. Yeah. But, beyond the conviction itself, Kristin Smart's tragedy, her case, it left this really lasting, important legal legacy in California, something that actually protects students today.
You're talking about the law passed in her name.
Exactly. That initial negligence, the really poor judgment shown by the University Police Department back in '96, it spurred immediate legislative action.
Resulting in the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act. And this wasn't just some local initiative, right? It was state level.
Oh, yeah. State Senator Mike Thompson wrote it and sponsored it. And its passage really showed how outraged the state legislature was by that initial police failure.
How did the vote go?
It passed overwhelmingly, 61-0 in the California state legislature. Then Governor Pete Wilson signed it into law on August 19, 1998, and it became mandatory statewide the following January.
So this wasn't just a suggestion or a new policy guideline. It was actual law.
Absolutely. It fundamentally changed how campus security must operate in California's public educational institutions.
So what does the law actually require? What are the specific actionable things that changed student safety because of this?
Basically, it ensures that campus police can never again just dismiss a disappearance like Kristin's as an unannounced vacation. The act mandated that every public college, every publicly funded educational institution in California must create explicit written agreements with their local external law enforcement agencies.
Like the local sheriff's office or the city police.
Exactly. And these agreements force the campus police to notify those outside agencies immediately right away whenever a student is reported missing or when there's any suspicion that a student might be involved in or the victim of an act of violence.
So it directly closes that loophole, that gap in communication that
Yeah.
cost the Smart investigation that crucial first week back in 1996.
Precisely. It forces coordination and ensures that serious cases get escalated to the agencies with more resources and jurisdiction immediately. It's a tragic legacy, obviously, born from terrible circumstances, but there's no question it makes students safer on public campuses in California today.
Wow. So this deep dive, it really just highlights the sheer tenacity required for justice sometimes, doesn't it? You've got decades of institutional failure on one side.
Yeah, starting right from that initial UPD response in '96, the lost evidence like that earring, just years and years of cold trails, failed searches, hitting dead ends with the civil suits.
Pitted against the absolute dedication of a family who just refused to give up. And then finally, the investigative innovation driven by, well, renewed resources and that incredible surge of public interest.
It really was that specific combination of factors in the 2010s that finally broke it open, wasn't it? You had the sheriff's office putting in thousands of hours on the internal review. You had the massive, sustained public pressure, amplified hugely by that independent podcast, Your Own Backyard, which actually helped uncover new witnesses.
And then the technology, the eventual success of the GPR and the cadaver dogs, finding that definitive biological proof on Ruben Flores' property.
Exactly. It took 26 years, 26 long years. But Paul Flores was finally convicted of first-degree murder.
It's an absolutely compelling case. It shows that even when evidence is old, fragmented, maybe even deliberately covered up, justice can still sometimes be found.
It can. But it raises this one last really important question that still hangs over this case, especially for the Smart family and the community.
It is.
Despite the conviction, despite the biological evidence found under Ruben Flores' deck, Kristin Smart's body has never actually been located. Paul Flores is in prison, yes, but the physical location of her remains, that's still his secret.
So the final question is, what does justice truly mean when the killer is convicted, but the victim's body is never found? Can there ever be real closure for the family, even with a successful prosecution, when that final essential piece of the tragedy, her final resting place, remains unknown?
Exactly. The legal case might be closed, for the most part. But that physical quest, the search for Kristin Smart herself, that continues. And it's a search that, sadly, may never truly end. It leaves you thinking about what closure really means in cases like these.